everybody, and welcome back to Pulpit of the Last Days. The Bible foretells at least 13 false teachings that will rise to challenge the church in the last days. In our series so far, we've already discussed several of those, and in our previous video, we brought that discussion down from the doctrinal level to the ministerial level so we could see how those teachings actually operate. Now, we use the Deliverance Ministry as our model because it incorporates so much technique from the other ones. But at some point, you have to bring it down yet another level to examine the role of the Lawless Ministers themselves, who play such a major role in defining these ministries. And that's what we're going to do in this video. But there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. 2 Peter 2 provides a lengthy and detailed description of those false teachers, and the Epistle of Jude provides further details. Between them, those false teachers are so thoroughly discovered that if you know these scriptures, you can thoroughly anticipate their moves. Just bear one more thing in mind, and this one thing is boiled down from the essence of those two chapters. False teachers always want to make a splash for themselves. So if you think of their options at any given point, they will always choose the most audacious one that they think they can get away with. So if you know those scriptures and you keep that one more point in mind, you can be a step ahead of them all the way. The great advantage that those lawless ministers have is in their persona. We should not expect the stereotype of a loathsome old man lurking in the shadows. Probably the opposite would be true. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness. These ministers are able to speak out and to speak their mind. They're the sort of person that people like talking to. We must consider why they are so dangerous. They are leadership types whose learning and whose speaking abilities are impressive. Now, initially they'll be involved in some sort of lay ministry that's practiced in seclusion. But at the same time, they may be involved in some sort of volunteer position in the church. Because with false teachers, public respect is a pretty big need. One trait those false teachers will have in common, which is prominently mentioned by both Peter and Jude, is their obsession with demonology. But their understanding is coming from that vast tapestry of lore that we've been discussing in our previous videos. These quotations have been posted in their context so you can see their application. It's all about spiritual warfare with them. Both apostles are warning us that false teachers will intrude into spiritual things they do not understand, and that's where demonology's tapestry of lore begins. Then as now, that tapestry is full of unscriptural legends, fables, and myths, and according to both apostles, it is here that false teachers begin to corrupt themselves. What I'd like you to see is that false ministers think they are fighting against the enemy, and it's actually a large part of their motivation. But they are actually playing into his hands. When they set aside Scripture and go by their experience, they're simply going to learn whatever the enemy has maneuvered them into learning. That's why they're called his ministers in 2 Corinthians 11, Satan's ministers, and yet they may have a deliverance ministry. You see the sort of blindness they're laboring under? They're doing far more harm than good. False teachers will be up on all the latest spiritual fads and doctrines. In terms of body ministry, they'll focus on the sort of ministry that addresses personal problems involving sin. But the real question we should be asking is, what's in it for them? False teachers have three hidden motivations of the heart, which are commonly and correctly known as the 3 G's: gold, glory, and girls. Now, Peter and Jude both address their desire for money at some length, and that's kind of self-explanatory anyway. So let's take a look at their other two motivations and how those desires shape that minister's recruiting efforts. The first type of follower they'll purposely target will be a promising young Christian whom the Lord may be raising up for leadership, but while they're still at a vulnerable stage, a novice. If they can be captured as a protege then the zeal of that student will be attributed to the ministry of the false teacher. Hey, I see that the Lord is doing wonders in your life. Let me share with you some of the things that the Lord has shared with me in my ministry, and maybe we can do some ministry together one of these days. You'll never be more than a junior partner beneath me, of course, and I can help you get your start in lay ministry. They zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. Actually, that young person is heading for a degree of isolation, as the false minister draws away a disciple after himself. And eventually, unless he's recovered, that young protege is going to become twofold the child of hell as his mentor. The second type of follower that a false minister will intentionally target involves a fleshly situation, like a cloaked romantic interest. This is especially a problem with a young minister. In a situation like this, he may approach her saying, "Well, your problem is the very thing I minister in. I'm just the person to help you. Let me share a few things with you." But the light that is in him is darkness. Again, he's trying to draw her away after himself into a degree of isolation. For of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, having eyes full of adultery and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. What is Paul talking about when he says they're making captives of gullible women laden with sin? What does he mean when he says that they're being brought into bondage, as in bondage to sin? Well, part of the meaning is that this ministry that they have in mind for them is never going to come to an end. False teachers don't ever want their followers to stop following. And that is where these ministers play such a huge role in defining their ministry. Using the Deliverance Ministry again as our model, here's a true story. Now, as we proceed, look for some of the points we've raised along the way, and you'll be able to see them at work in this story. At an evangelistic crusade, a young man in his early 20s came to the Lord, and he was quickly approached by two deliverance ministers. They took him aside and told him that based on their discernment, they saw that he was demon-possessed. Notice was given to the demons, they bound the strong man, and they set up an appointment for a few days later. At that appointment, in seclusion, they prophesied to him and told him that the demon possession had started in the following manner. One of his ancestors had been a Protestant reformer, but the Catholics had caught him and burned him at the stake, but he didn't die. Still, at that point, a bitter root judgment was formed. Wow, you think? And that gave demons a legal right to inhabit him. Over the centuries, that stronghold had come down through the bloodlines of iniquity and affected this young man himself when he was 12 years old. For him, this began a lengthy deliverance process. Based on the psychological therapy of age regression, he was told to return in his mind to those days and for the next month act like a 12-year-old. In the month following, he would act like a 13-year-old, etc., until he caught up to his present age. At each stage, they would meet again, and the new demons that had come out in that year would be discerned, and they would be cast out of him. Now, when he reached about 16, there was some kind of special event that happened. And when something like that happens, the deliverance ministers will prophesy again and get all the details over it and deal with the demon that way. And possibly some other fad ministerial techniques were used. Many will say to me in that day, "Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name?" And then I will declare to them, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." But even at the end of that year, he still needed to walk in his deliverance. This means that every time he sinned, it gave those demons a legal right to return. And so further deliverance was always going to be needed. Now you can see where a ministry like that is never going to go away. Psychology, iniquities, inner healing, deliverance, spiritual warfare, and goodness knows what other fad ministries were crammed into those secret deliverance sessions. He began reading his Bible too, but through those eyes, everything in the Bible was about the secret hidden war with demons as its deeper meaning. Demons were lurking behind every tree. Eventually, the same young man began his own deliverance ministry, which he secretly brought into the college group in his church. There, he was smitten by a pretty young girl who quickly became his chief target. He drew her away into a secluded ministry, and the change that followed in her life was appalling. Before that, she had sparkled with Jesus. But after that, they were always together, and if you tried to talk to her, she would look to him to see if it would be okay to answer. But he would always answer for her. Having eyes full of adultery and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have a heart trained in covetous practices and are accursed children. By now he was flushed with victory and beginning to feel bolder, and he's becoming a real problem in that group as he spread his recruitment efforts to more of the students. But his secret doings were coming out and beginning to become known, and some in that group began to confront him. At about that same time, he proposed to that young girl, saying, "God has told me we're supposed to get married." But she flatly rejected him and broke away. And that was just the beginning of the bad news that was going to start coming his way. You see, the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and how to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who walk according to the flesh and the lust of uncleanness and despise authority as he had done. After that, he began a scorched earth policy, doing as much damage as he could in that church before withdrawing from them and fleeing down to Mexico, where 2 Mexican churches had the moral fortitude to disfellowship him. Through all of this, his life was falling to pieces with constant punishment and woe, including severe health problems, which totally boxed him in. Even he himself would admit that the hand of God had gone out against him. Within 2 years, he had died of natural causes, still very young. And he had become a perfect example of what 2 Peter 2 and Jude were talking about. If you decide to confront a false teacher, you've probably reached a point of exasperation with them. But you must humble yourself and take the longer view. You have to follow the counsel that Jesus gave in Matthew 18. This means you're going to be speaking to them with the hope of regaining your brother. You're there to give them another chance. You have to show that you're reasonable, make your points from Scripture, and show that you care for them. You've also got to follow up with lots of prayer for them. But to be honest with you, you've got a 50-50 chance here. Jude says that they will flatter people to gain advantage, so you have to watch and see what happens. They may simply ignore your reproof, or they may take their ministry into deeper seclusion and continue. If it becomes necessary to take this further and admonish them a second time, you must again take the longer view. Jesus said to take 1 or 2 others with you, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. The Lord's level of concern here is so great that he personally will attend this meeting in a special way. This is the context for the verse that says, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them." And remember, he's watching you too, so be an honest voice for him. You're still trying to reach this person if possible. And choosing your witnesses, you should bear the next step in mind as well, in case that becomes needful. If they still do not heed the reproof, you have to take them before the entire church. So choose witnesses who can help you do that. Choose your pastor or choose one of your elders as those witnesses, because they are the ones God has put in authority to perform that function. And be ready. Likewise also, these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries. If false ministers are reproved at this stage and they rebel again, they are ready for a fight, and they are likely to spread their version of the confrontation to others very quickly in order to gain their sympathy and create a division. So you'd better be ready to move on to that third step very promptly. If you fail in your resolve at this point, they won't. They are presumptuous, self-willed, and self-centered. These are grumblers, complainers, walking according to their own lusts, and they mouth great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantage. In particular, they'll claim, the church is picking on me, and they're not walking in love toward me, and those ministers are being mean to me. Christians always lower their guard when they hear talk like that, and they rally to the poor offended soul to make it up to them. But that is the false teacher's siren call. He is intentionally playing on those very feelings to draw innocent Christians in closer where they can flounder like a ship on a hidden reef. These are the ones who are like hidden reefs in your love feasts, when they feast with you without fear, like shepherds caring only for themselves. Use love, this same young man was taught by his mentor. They can't fight against you when you use it. It was the voice of experience. Like a teenage boy with raging hormones. If you love me, you'd let me. But if anyone is lacking in their love walk, it is them. As Jude said, they're only caring for themselves. To them, everyone else is a pawn in the great intoxicating game of controlling people's souls and subjugating them. In 1 Timothy, Paul said to follow sound doctrine so your progress will be evident to all. In 2 Timothy, he spoke of those who followed false doctrine who would progress no further, but their folly would be made manifest to all. It's a perfect contrast, and it makes a perfect point. You can always tell when someone's gotten hold of a false teaching because they will stagnate there. Their whole Christian walk will seem to orbit around that one teaching, and that will become God's will for everyone now. That's what they're going to counsel the next 10 people they meet, whether it has anything to do with their problem or not. For them, that teaching has truly become another gospel. Now, I don't like to make videos that are this long, but I wanted to get past this hurtful subject that we've been discussing so we can get onto the good side of the end-time church, where things are much more encouraging because of their focus on Jesus. And that's where we're heading, starting in our next video. I hope you enjoyed this video from Pulpit of the Last Days, short essays about the end-time church as foretold in the New Testament. If you did enjoy it, please go ahead and click on that thumbs up button. For previous videos, check out our website at pulpitofthelastdays.com. Also, we post new videos weekly, so if you'd like to receive more videos like this one, all you need to do is subscribe.